I never thought retiring at 55 would lead to a legal battle with the most vindictive woman I'd ever met. But there I was, sitting in a lawyer's office with 3 months of security footage that would change everything. My name is Thomas Everett, and I'd spent 30 years building a successful software consulting business in Austin, Texas. When I finally sold it in early 2025, I did what any sensible person would do with their newfound wealth and freedom. I bought a lake house. Not just any lake house, but a beautiful 3-bedroom property on Lake Travis, about 40 minutes from downtown Austin. The place had a private dock, a boathouse, and enough land that I didn't have to worry about neighbors being too close. Or so I thought. The house came with one significant caveat that my realtor had mentioned, but I'd brushed off as a minor annoyance. It was part of the Waterside Estates HOA, a collection of about 60 homes scattered around this particular cove of the lake. The HOA fees were reasonable at $200 a month, and the rules seemed standard enough. Keep your grass maintained, no loud parties after 10 p.m., maintain the aesthetic standards of the community. Simple stuff that any reasonable person could follow without issue. I closed on the property in March, and by April, I'd moved most of my belongings from my Austin condo to the lake house. The plan was simple. I'd spend weekdays at the lake, working on my boat, maybe doing some fishing and generally enjoying the retirement I'd worked so hard to achieve. Weekends, I might head back to Austin to see friends or catch a show. It was perfect, or it would have been if I hadn't received my first HOA violation notice 3 weeks after moving in. The notice came in a crisp white envelope with the HOA letterhead, delivered not by mail but tucked into my door. It stated that my dock needed repainting to match community standards, and that I had 30 days to comply. The thing was, my dock had been freshly painted the year before by the previous owner. I had the receipts and photos to prove it. The color was the exact shade of gray specified in the HOA guidelines I'd received at closing. I called the number listed on the violation notice and reached a woman named Deborah Patterson. She was the HOA president, and from the moment she answered the phone, I could hear the condescension dripping from her voice. "Mr. Everett, the violation notice is quite clear. Your dock doesn't meet our standards," she said. "I have documentation showing it was painted last year in the exact color specified in the guidelines," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Well, perhaps the guidelines were updated since then. Regardless, you need to repaint it." "Can you send me the updated guidelines?" There was a pause. "I'll have to check with the board. In the meantime, the violation stands." I hung up feeling irritated but not overly concerned. I figured it was some kind of mistake that would sort itself out. I sent an email to the HOA address with photos and receipts attached, explaining the situation. A week later, I received a response from Deborah stating that the board had reviewed my case and determined the violation was valid. No explanation, no updated guidelines, just a terse paragraph telling me to comply or face fines. That should have been my first real warning about what I was dealing with. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting in May. It was held at the community clubhouse, a modest building near the entrance of Waterside Estates. About 15 homeowners were there, along with the 5 board members. Deborah Patterson sat at the center of the table, and the moment I saw her, I understood everything. She was probably in her early 50s, with short blonde hair styled in what I'd call an aggressive bob. She wore a pantsuit despite the casual setting and had reading glasses on a chain around her neck. But it was her expression that really told the story. She looked at the assembled homeowners like a middle school principal surveying a room full of delinquents. I waited through 20 minutes of mundane business before the floor was opened for homeowner concerns. I raised my hand. "Yes," Deborah said, not bothering to mask her impatience. "Thomas Everett, 1847 Lakeview Drive. I wanted to discuss the violation notice I received about my dock." "We've already addressed your email, Mr. Everett. The violation stands. But I haven't received any updated guidelines showing what color the dock should be. I have documentation proving it meets the original specifications. The board has discretion to determine what meets community standards. We've determined your dock doesn't meet those standards. Next concern." I felt my face flush. "That's not how this works. You can't just arbitrarily decide something doesn't meet standards when it clearly does. I'd like to formally contest this violation." Deborah removed her glasses and fixed me with a cold stare. "Mr. Everett, you're new to this community. Perhaps you don't understand how we do things here. The board makes decisions in the best interest of all homeowners. If you have a problem with that, you're welcome to review the HOA bylaws. Now, is there anyone else with a legitimate concern?" The dismissal was so blatant that I heard a few other homeowners gasp. I sat down, my jaw clenched, and stayed for the rest of the meeting. As people filed out afterward, an older gentleman named Frank approached me. "Don't take it personally," he said quietly. "Deborah's like that with everyone. Most of us just try to stay off her radar." "How long has she been president?" "4 years. She ran unopposed the last 2 elections. Nobody wants the headache." I drove home that night fuming. The next morning, I did what I should have done from the start. I reviewed the HOA bylaws in detail. What I found was enlightening. According to the bylaws, any violation notice had to cite specific rule violations with documentation. The board couldn't just make arbitrary decisions. There was also a formal appeals process that Deborah had completely ignored. I spent the next week preparing a detailed response, citing the relevant bylaws and including all my documentation. I sent it via certified mail to ensure there was a record. I also sent copies to each board member individually. The response came faster than I expected. Another violation notice, this time claiming my boat wasn't properly secured to the dock. Then another one stating that my grass was half an inch too tall. Then one claiming I had unauthorized plants in my front yard. All of these arrived within a 2-week span, and all of them were equally baseless. I was being targeted, and it was obvious. By June, I'd racked up 5 violation notices, each one more ridiculous than the last. The fines were starting to add up too. $50 per violation, with the threat of placing a lien on my property if I didn't pay. I consulted with a real estate attorney in Austin who specialized in HOA disputes. Her name was Rachel Morris, and after reviewing my case, she gave me a grim assessment. "This happens more often than you'd think," she said. "HOA boards get a little power and it goes to their heads. The problem is, fighting them is expensive and time-consuming, even when you're clearly in the right. So what are my options? You can pay the fines and try to avoid further issues. You can fight each violation individually through the appeals process. Or you can sell the property and cut your losses." None of those options appealed to me. I'd paid $800,000 for that lake house. I'd dreamed about retiring there, and I'd be damned if some power-hungry HOA president was going to drive me out. What if I run for the board? I asked. Rachel smiled. "That's actually not a bad idea. Elections are typically in the fall. If you can get on the board, you can at least have a voice in decisions." I left her office with a plan. I'd endure the harassment until the elections. Then I'd run for a board position and help reform this dysfunctional HOA from the inside. That plan lasted exactly 2 more weeks. I decided to spend a long weekend in early July at my Austin condo. I had tickets to a concert on Saturday night and plans to meet up with some old business colleagues. I left Thursday afternoon, making sure everything at the lake house was secured. I'd learned to be meticulous about potential violations. Sunday evening, I drove back to Lake Travis. It was just getting dark when I pulled into my driveway, and immediately something felt off. There were tire tracks on my lawn, fresh ones that definitely weren't there when I'd left. As I got out of my truck, I heard music coming from the direction of my backyard. I walked around the side of the house and stopped dead. There were people on my dock, at least a dozen of them, drinking and laughing. Someone had set up a portable speaker, and pop music was blasting across the water. 2 people were in my boat, which I'd left locked and secured. "Hey!" I shouted, storming toward the dock. "What the hell is going on?" The music cut off, and people turned to look at me. That's when I saw her. Deborah Patterson, standing on my dock with a wine glass in her hand, wearing a sundress and looking completely unconcerned. "Mr. Everett," she said calmly, "you're back early. This is my property. What are you doing here? The HOA has access rights to all waterfront areas for community events. It's in the bylaws." "That's complete bullshit and you know it. Please watch your language." "We're simply exercising our rights as outlined in Section 7, subsection 4 of the HOA guidelines." I pulled out my phone. "Get off my property right now, or I'm calling the police." One of the other people, a man in his 40s wearing board shorts, stepped forward. "Look, buddy, no need to get hostile. Deborah organized this gathering. We're all homeowners here." "I don't care who you are. This is private property and you're trespassing." Deborah sighed dramatically. "If you insist on being difficult about this, we'll leave. But I should warn you, I'll be filing a complaint with the board about your hostile behavior toward your neighbors." I watched in disbelief as she and her guests slowly gathered their belongings and made their way off my property. It took 20 minutes, during which Deborah made a show of checking that everyone had their things and commenting loudly about what an unfriendly neighbor I was. When they were finally gone, I inspected the damage. There were beer bottles and food wrappers scattered around the dock. Someone had spilled red wine on the deck chairs. My boat's lock had been forced open, and the interior was a mess. I was shaking with anger as I started cleaning up. The next morning, I called Rachel Morris and described what had happened. "That's trespassing," she said immediately. The HOA access clause doesn't work the way she described. It typically only applies to common areas, not private docks. "So I can file charges." "You could, but without proof, it's your word against theirs." And with an HOA president, the police might be reluctant to get involved in what they see as a civil dispute. "What if I had cameras?" There was a pause. "Do you have cameras?" "Not yet, but I'm going to." I spent that afternoon researching security systems. By Wednesday, I'd ordered a comprehensive setup. 8 cameras in total, covering every angle of my property. The main ones focused on the driveway, front door, back door, dock, and boathouse. They were wireless, high definition, with night vision and motion detection. The footage uploaded automatically to cloud storage, so even if someone found and destroyed the cameras, I'd still have the recordings. The installation took me most of Thursday. I mounted the cameras carefully, making sure they were visible enough to serve as a deterrent but not so obvious that someone could easily disable them. By Friday afternoon, the system was fully operational. I didn't have to wait long to see results. The following weekend, I drove to Austin again. This time it was planned. I wanted to see if Deborah would try another party at my place. I left Friday evening and stayed at my condo, monitoring the camera feeds on my phone. Saturday afternoon, around 2 p.m., I got a motion alert. I opened the app and watched as a car pulled into my driveway. Deborah got out, along with two other women I recognized from the HOA meeting. They walked right up to my front door and tried the handle. When it didn't open, Deborah pulled out a key. I sat up straight, my heart pounding. Where did she get a key to my house? They went inside. For the next hour, the interior cameras, which I'd strategically placed to cover the main living areas without invading privacy, showed them walking through my home, commenting on my furniture and belongings. At one point, Deborah opened my refrigerator and took out a beer. Then the real party started. Around 4 p.m., cars began arriving. Lots of them. I watched the camera feeds in growing disbelief as Deborah directed people to park on my lawn, on my driveway, wherever they could fit. By 5 p.m., there were at least 30 people on my property. They were everywhere. In my house, on my deck, on my dock, in my boat. Someone found my liquor cabinet and started making drinks. A couple decided to use my bedroom, which made me want to throw my phone across the room. Deborah held court on my back deck, playing hostess like she owned the place. I called Rachel Morris immediately. "You have this on camera?" she asked. "Every second of it, multiple angles. Don't go back there. Let her continue. The more evidence you have, the better. And definitely don't tell her about the cameras. She's destroying my house." "I understand your anger, Thomas, but trust me on this. Document everything. We're going to bury her." So I stayed in Austin, watching the feeds and taking screenshots of the most egregious moments. The party went on until past midnight. I documented people swimming drunk in the lake, someone breaking a lamp in my living room, multiple instances of people going through my personal belongings. And through it all, Deborah was clearly the organizer and host. When everyone finally left around 1 a.m., I watched Deborah do a walkthrough of my house. She straightened some furniture, threw away some obvious trash, but left most of the mess. Then she locked up with her key and drove away. I didn't sleep much that night. Sunday morning, I headed back to the lake house, not knowing exactly what I'd find. The cameras didn't capture smells or the full extent of certain types of damage. Walking in was worse than I'd expected. The place reeked of alcohol and sweat. There were stains on my couch, dishes piled in the sink, and what looked like vomit on my bathroom floor. The bedroom where that couple had gone was a disaster I didn't even want to think about. My boat was scratched and dented, clearly from people who had no idea how to operate it properly. I spent Sunday documenting everything with photos and video, making sure to get detailed shots of all the damage. Then I started the unpleasant task of cleaning. It took me most of the day, and even then, I knew I'd need professional cleaners and probably some furniture replaced. Monday morning, I was back in Rachel's office with a laptop full of evidence. "This is incredible," she said, watching the footage. "I've handled a lot of HOA cases, but I've never seen anything this blatant. She actually used a key to enter your home. That's what I want to know." "Where did she get a key?" Rachel made some notes. "Probably from the previous owner or the builder. Sometimes HOA presidents get copies of keys under the guise of emergency access. It's usually spelled out in the CC and Articus if it's allowed, which it rarely is. So what do we do now?" "First, we send a formal demand letter to Deborah and the HOA board. We outline the trespass, the property damage, and the unauthorized entry. We include select screenshots from your cameras as evidence. We demand compensation for damages and a formal apology. And we state that if we don't receive a satisfactory response within 10 days, we'll be filing a lawsuit. What about criminal charges? This is breaking and entering. We can file a police report, and I recommend we do. But honestly, the civil case is going to be more effective." We're going to sue her personally and the HOA for damages, emotional distress, and violation of your property rights. With this evidence, we have an incredibly strong case. We spent the next few hours drafting the demand letter and compiling the evidence package. Rachel was thorough, selecting video clips and screenshots that clearly showed Deborah's involvement and the extent of the damage. We documented the broken items, the stains, the unauthorized use of my boat, everything. The letter was sent Wednesday via certified mail and email. Now we had to wait. I didn't have to wait long for a response, just not the one I expected. Thursday afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mr. Everett, this is Deborah Patterson." I put the phone on speaker and started recording. "Miss Patterson, I received your ridiculous letter this morning. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but making false accusations against the HOA president is a serious matter. The accusations aren't false. I have video evidence of everything." "You can't have video evidence of something that didn't happen. I was never at your property. Neither was anyone else. And if you continue with this harassment, I'll be forced to take action against you." "Go ahead," I said calmly. "I'll see you in court." She hung up. I immediately sent the recording to Rachel. Friday morning, I got another violation notice. This one claimed I'd installed security cameras without HOA approval and demanded their immediate removal. It also stated that the cameras violated the privacy of my neighbors and were prohibited by HOA rules. I actually laughed when I read it. Rachel laughed too when I forwarded it to her. "She's panicking," Rachel said. "This is perfect. It shows consciousness of guilt. She knows you have evidence, so now she's trying to force you to remove the cameras, which, by the way, you're absolutely allowed to have on your own property." So I ignore this completely. In fact, let's accelerate our timeline. I'm filing the lawsuit today. The lawsuit was comprehensive. We sued Deborah Patterson personally for trespass, breaking and entering, destruction of property, and emotional distress. We also sued the Waterside Estates HOA for failure to supervise their president, harassment, and violation of my rights as a homeowner. We were asking for actual damages to cover repairs and replacement of damaged items, which I'd had appraised at around $15,000. We were also asking for punitive damages, legal fees, and a court order forcing the HOA to implement proper oversight procedures. The total we were seeking was $60,000. Rachel filed the suit in Travis County District Court. Once the filing was public record, things started moving fast. Within days, other homeowners from Waterside Estates started reaching out to me. It turned out I wasn't the only one Deborah had targeted. A couple named Jim and Susan Reeves told me how Deborah had filed dozens of frivolous violations against them when they'd questioned a dues increase. An elderly man named Walter Chen described how Deborah had threatened to foreclose on his property over unpaid fines that he'd never actually been properly notified about. The stories kept coming, and a pattern emerged. Deborah targeted anyone who questioned her authority. She used violation notices as weapons. And apparently, I wasn't the first person whose property she'd used without permission, though I seemed to be the first to catch her on camera. Rachel suggested we document all of this. We created a detailed file of complaints against Deborah, all from different homeowners. While they weren't directly part of my lawsuit, they established a pattern of behavior that would be useful in court. Meanwhile, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, but Frank, the elderly gentleman who'd first warned me about Deborah, attended and gave me a full report. "She told the board that you're a troublemaker who's trying to destroy the community," Frank said. She claimed your lawsuit is baseless and that the HOA insurance will handle it. But here's the interesting part. Two of the board members asked her directly if she'd been at your property. She said no, that you fabricated evidence somehow. Did anyone believe her? Frank shrugged. Hard to say. The board's been following her lead for so long, I don't think they know how to question her, but there was definitely tension in the room. The pre-trial proceedings began in August. Deborah had hired a lawyer, a guy named Gregory Marsh who specialized in defending HOA boards. His strategy became clear immediately. Deny everything, attack my credibility, and claim the video evidence was somehow faked or taken out of context. The discovery phase was where things got interesting. Rachel subpoenaed all HOA records, including emails, financial documents, and minutes from board meetings. What we found was damning. Deborah had been using HOA funds inappropriately for years. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger an audit, but consistent. Dinners charged as board meetings that only she attended. Office supplies that included personal items. Community improvement projects that never actually happened. We estimated she'd embezzled around $12,000 over her 4 years as president. We also found emails between Deborah and other board members discussing me specifically. In them, she referred to me as that entitled newcomer and discussed strategies to make his life difficult until he learns his place. One email, sent right before her first party at my house, said, "Don't worry about E.T., he's in Austin this weekend. Perfect timing for our lakeside gathering." Rachel was thrilled with the discovery materials. "This is even better than I hoped," she said. "We're not just going to win this case. We're going to destroy her. Should we bring in the police about the embezzlement? Let's wait until after the trial. Right now, I want to focus on your case. But yes, this is criminal. She's going to face more than just a civil judgment." In September, we sat for depositions. Deborah's was particularly memorable. Under oath, she maintained that she'd never been to my property without permission. Rachel then showed her the video footage, timestamp by timestamp. Watching Deborah's face as she realized there was no way out was almost worth everything I'd been through. I was there on official HOA business," she stammered. "You testified 30 seconds ago that you were never there," Rachel said calmly. "I misspoke. What I meant was, and what official HOA business required you to use Mr. Everett's bedroom?" The deposition went downhill from there. Deborah changed her story 3 more times, each version contradicting the previous one. Her lawyer looked increasingly uncomfortable. By October, we were preparing for trial. Rachel had lined up several witnesses, including homeowners who'd been harassed by Deborah, an expert on HOA law, and a damages expert to testify about the cost of repairs and emotional distress. But we never made it to trial. 2 weeks before the court date, Gregory Marsh called Rachel with a settlement offer. The HOA insurance was willing to pay $20,000 if I dropped the suit against both Deborah and the HOA. "Not a chance," I said when Rachel told me. "I want a full trial. I want everyone to see exactly what she did." "I understand, but let me float a counteroffer. Sometimes that reveals how nervous they really are." Rachel went back with a counter. $60,000, a public apology from Deborah, her immediate resignation as HOA president, and a restraining order preventing her from any further harassment. Plus, the HOA had to implement new oversight procedures and allow me to run for the board without opposition. We expected them to reject it. Instead, 3 days later, they accepted. The settlement conference was held in a meeting room at Rachel's firm. Deborah looked like she'd aged 10 years since I'd first met her. Her lawyer did most of the talking. My client maintains that this was all a misunderstanding, Gregory said. But in the interest of resolving this matter, she's willing to accept the terms of the settlement and the resignation. Rachel asked. She'll resign effective immediately after the settlement is signed. And the public apology? Gregory slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a statement Deborah had drafted, apologizing for any inconvenience or misunderstanding caused by her actions. It was weak, barely an apology at all. Not acceptable, I said. I want a real apology, one that specifically acknowledges what she did. Deborah finally spoke, her voice tight with anger. I've already agreed to your extortionate demands. Don't push your luck, Rachel smiled. Miss Patterson, you're not in a position to negotiate. You trespassed on my client's property multiple times, illegally entered his home, caused significant damage, and then lied about it under oath. You're lucky we're willing to settle at all. Now, you can write a proper apology or we can let a jury decide how much you owe him. Your choice. The room went silent. Deborah's face was red, but she pulled out a pen and started writing. The apology she produced was better, if still grudging. It acknowledged that she had used my property without permission, caused damage, and violated my rights as a homeowner. It stated that her behavior was unacceptable and that she took full responsibility. We signed the settlement agreement that afternoon. The HOA's insurance would pay $40,000. Deborah personally would pay the remaining $20,000. She'd resign immediately and was prohibited from running for the board again or attending board meetings except as a regular homeowner. The restraining order would remain in effect for 5 years. I walked out of that meeting feeling vindicated, but I wasn't quite done. The following week, I attended my first HOA board meeting as an official observer. Deborah's resignation had been announced to the community, though the full details of the settlement were confidential. There was a lot of speculation about what had happened. During the meeting, I stood up during the homeowner comment period. For those who don't know me, I'm Thomas Everett. Some of you may have heard that I recently settled a legal dispute with the previous HOA president. I want you to know that I'm running for the board in next month's elections. But before that happens, I think the community deserves to know what's been going on. I spent the next 15 minutes outlining in general terms the harassment I'd faced, the unauthorized use of my property, and the pattern of abuse that other homeowners had experienced. I didn't violate the confidentiality agreement, but I said enough that people understood this wasn't just a personal dispute. The HOA is supposed to protect our property values and our rights as homeowners, I said. Instead, it's been used as a weapon against anyone who asks questions. That needs to change. If you elect me to the board, I'll work to implement real oversight, transparency, and accountability. Thank you. The room was silent for a moment, then someone started clapping. Others joined in. By the time I sat down, half the room was applauding. The elections happened in November. I ran for one of 3 open board positions, and the turnout was the highest in Waterside Estates history. When the results came in, I'd won by a landslide. So had 2 other reform-minded candidates, both homeowners who'd been targeted by Deborah. Our first act as the new board was to hire an independent auditor to review the HOA's finances. The audit confirmed what we'd suspected. Deborah had embezzled over $12,000 during her tenure. We turned the findings over to the Travis County District Attorney's Office. In January 2026, Deborah Patterson was charged with theft by a public servant and abuse of official capacity. She pleaded guilty in March and was sentenced to 2 years probation, restitution of the stolen funds, and 200 hours of community service. It was a relatively light sentence, but combined with the civil judgment, It effectively bankrupted her. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband were planning to sell their house and move out of state. I wish I could say I felt bad for her, but I didn't. She'd brought it all on herself. By spring 2026, the new HOA board had implemented a series of reforms. We established clear procedures for violations, including a requirement that all notices cite specific rule violations with photographic evidence. We created an appeals process with a neutral third party. We implemented financial controls to prevent embezzlement, and we started holding quarterly town halls where homeowners could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. The change in community atmosphere was remarkable. People who'd been living in fear of arbitrary violation notices started enjoying their properties again. Neighbors who'd been afraid to question the board's decisions began participating in community discussions. The HOA became what it was supposed to be, an organization that served the homeowners, not the other way around. As for me, I finally got to enjoy my retirement. I spent my mornings fishing from my dock, afternoons working on my boat, and evenings watching the sunset over Lake Travis. The security cameras stayed up, not because I needed them anymore, but because they gave me peace of mind. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I'd sit on my deck with a beer and think about how close I'd come to just giving up and selling the place. How many other homeowners had Deborah driven away over the years? How many people had been too intimidated or too exhausted to fight back? The settlement money, after legal fees and repairs, came to about $45,000. I used some of it to upgrade the boat, replaced all the furniture that had been damaged or stained beyond repair, and donated a chunk to a legal aid organization that helps homeowners fight abusive HOAs. The rest went into an account I earmarked for future legal defense, just in case. Once you've been through something like this, you learn to be prepared. The most satisfying moment came about 6 months after the settlement, when I ran into Jim Reeves, one of the homeowners who'd been targeted by Deborah before me. He'd been so beaten down by her harassment that he'd stopped attending board meetings and was considering selling. "You know what the best part is?" he said to me at a community barbecue that summer. "I'm not afraid to check my mail anymore." For 3 years, every time I saw an envelope with the HOA logo, my stomach would drop. I'd wonder what ridiculous violation she'd come up with this time. Now I actually enjoy living here again. That's what it came down to, really. People should feel safe and happy in their own homes. And HOA, at its best, facilitates that by maintaining standards and organizing the community. At its worst, it becomes a tool for petty tyrants to exercise power over their neighbors. I served on the board for 2 years before deciding I'd done enough. By then, the reforms were firmly in place, and there was a healthy culture of accountability. A new generation of board members had stepped up, people who understood that the position was about service, not power. These days, I spend my time exactly as I'd planned when I first bought the lake house. I fish, I work on my boat, I enjoy the peace and quiet of the water. I've made real friends in the community, people who appreciate what we all went through together and what we built in its place. The security cameras are still there, though I rarely check the footage anymore. They've become more of a deterrent than anything else. Every so often, when I have friends over, someone will ask about them, and I'll tell the story of Deborah Patterson and her unauthorized parties. It always gets a reaction, usually disbelief followed by outrage. "She really threw parties at your house while you were gone?" they'll ask. 3 of them before I caught her. The one I have on camera had 30 people. "And she used your bedroom," some of her guests did. "Trust me, you don't want the details." The story has become something of a legend in the Waterside Estates community. New homeowners hear about it during the orientation process as a cautionary tale about why the current oversight procedures exist. It's weird to have your personal nightmare become community lore, but if it prevents future abuse, I'm okay with it. Looking back now, from the comfort of my deck chair with the evening light turning the lake gold, I realize that buying this house was one of the best decisions I ever made. Not in spite of everything that happened with Deborah, but in a strange way because of it. I learned that standing up to bullies, even ones with official titles and apparent authority, is worth the effort. I learned that most people are decent and will support you if you give them the chance. And I learned that documentation is everything. Those security cameras didn't just help me win $60,000. They helped me reclaim my peace of mind and my property. Would I do it all again if I could go back? In a heartbeat. Well, maybe I'd install the cameras before the first party instead of after. But everything else? Absolutely. Some battles are worth fighting, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. The lake is calm tonight and my beer is cold. Tomorrow I'm taking the boat out early to try a new fishing spot someone told me about. Next week, there's a board meeting, but I'm just attending as a homeowner now. No responsibilities beyond showing up if I feel like it. And the week after that, I'm heading to Austin to catch up with Rachel Morris over dinner. We've become friends over the past year, bonding over the absurdity of HOA law and swapping stories about difficult clients and neighbors. Life is good. My dock is still the exact shade of gray it was when this all started, and nobody gives a damn because it's my dock on my property, and as long as it's maintained, that's all that matters. The grass is whatever height it needs to be for healthy growth. My boat is secured however I want it secured. And my house, my beautiful lake house, is mine in every sense of the word. Nobody throws parties there except me. And trust me, when I throw a party, everyone's invited. Well, everyone except Deborah Patterson. She's still technically a homeowner here, though I've heard she's rarely around. The last I heard, she was spending most of her time at her sister's place in Oklahoma, avoiding the community that used to fear her and now mostly just pities her. As the sun drops below the horizon and the evening birds start their songs, I raise my beer in a silent toast. To security cameras, to good lawyers, to standing your ground, and to the retirement I almost lost but fought to keep. The water laps gently against my dock, the one that doesn't need repainting. The sound is peaceful, rhythmic, exactly what I bought this place to hear. And as the stars begin to appear above Lake Travis, I smile, knowing that tomorrow will be another day in paradise. A paradise I earned, defended, and won.